So I like to think about us as waves arising from a very vast, eternal ocean. And what we know about a wave is that at the absolute subtlest level, the particles of the wave are the particles of the ocean. And the forces that impact the wave are the same forces that are impacting the ocean. And we arise from and are continuous with this ocean. And we can see how, using this ocean analogy, we are also continuous with each other at this really subtle level. And it's possible for a wave to have its unique individual expression as that wave, and at the same time not lose intimate contact with that vast eternal ocean from which it's arisen. That is a possibility for all waves. Even though waves are very distinct and individual in their characteristics, it is possible for the wave to express and at the same time have a conscious experience of that which is continuous with the rest of the ocean. Who have been having this experience since man was on the planet didn't need science to come along and validate it, but science is really good at that. And I think there are a couple of things worth pointing out that quantum physics has illustrated for us. And one of those things is that we are not discrete, separate entities. We are not separate from each other, and we can't be waves and particles and neither and both and be separate. So we know that it's measurable at this really subtle level. Again, people didn't need this to validate their experience, but it is, some people are it's helpful for. And another thing that quantum physics came along and demonstrated is that by the mere observation of a reality, that reality is impacted, is somehow altered or changed. And the more the observation, the greater the impact. So does that sound a little bit profound to anybody, that by the mere observation of a thing, we alter and change the thing? Does that sound kind of profound? Anybody? Does that sound profound? Yeah. Does that sound profound? So it sounds profound to me, and at the same time, it doesn't at all. It doesn't sound profound because, of course, we impact and alter reality. We are the fabric of the universe. We are creation itself in existence. So, of course, we have the power to alter things. And another thing that science came along and demonstrated was a group of non-meditators, and probably a lot of you are familiar with this research already, but for those of you who aren't, a group of non-meditators, and this has been actually going on for a while, and there have been a lot of studies about this since, but a woman by the name of Sarah Lazar, who is out of Harvard, she's a neuroscientist of some kind, she had got a lot of benefit from meditation, yoga, and so since she's a neuroscientist out of Harvard, she gets to do whatever she wants. And so she took a group of people who had never meditated, and they did MRIs of their brains. And they took these people through an 8-week meditation program. And these people meditated daily for, I think on average it was 27 minutes a day. They were asked to meditate for 40 minutes, but on average it turned out to be about 27 minutes a day. And then they did MRI scans of their brains at the conclusion of the study 8 weeks later. And what they saw on those MRI scans was significant and profound. And what they saw was that there were definite increases in gray matter in certain areas of the brain. So the pons, which is responsible for a lot of neurotransmitters, the posterior cingulate, which is responsible for, among other things, our sense of self-relevance and also mind wandering. The left hippocampus, which is responsible for learning, memory, cognition, and emotional regulation, significant increases in gray matter. And then the temporoparietal junction, which is responsible for perspective, empathy, and compassion. So there were marked, significant increases in gray matter density in the brain in only 8 weeks of 27 minutes a day of meditation. And there were significant decreases in the brain in the area around the amygdala. And the amygdala, as probably a lot of you know, is the seat of our fight or flight response. It is where our fear comes from. And so, needless to say, science has come along and said, yeah, you guys are creators. You guys have impact. So little backstory. I grew up in Virginia. I've been out here for over 20 years now, but in Virginia, where I grew up, we call this the Virginia garden spider. And I know the spider's in a lot of other places too, because I've seen it. And for over 15 years, I have done a yearly 10-day silent meditation retreat. It's been a big part of my path. And a couple of years ago, I was at the center in Texas for the Vipassana meditation called Dhammasiri. And there's a building called the Pagoda, and the Pagoda is a room where everybody gets their own single meditation cell. And I was walking into the Pagoda one day, and there's this overhang, and it's a big wooden overhang. It's pretty high. And I happened to notice this enormous web that spanned at least 2 feet with one of these beautiful spiders in the middle of it. And, it's kind of an austere process, these meditation retreats. And you're with yourself the whole time. So a little distraction is not a bad thing, especially when it looks like that. And so I would stand and watch this spider in the center of her web, and I would watch as the wind sort of billowed her web back and forth, and she would just sit utterly still in the center of that web. And I watched her one time eating a butterfly, which was a really wild thing to see, this giant spider wrangling a butterfly. And then one morning, I was actually sitting in what's called the Dhamma Hall meditating, and there it's our 4:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. is the morning meditation time. And there were some significant storms that came through. And there was driving wind and and driving rain, and I knew that my friend's web was going to be destroyed. That's what I was thinking about, right? And I was hopeful that she would be okay. And so after breakfast, I went out to the pagoda to check on her. And sure enough, she was still there. Her web, in fact, had been destroyed. And she had already gotten the big, like, frame, you know, done. And it was really the first time in my life where I had watched a spider like that. So, you know, I've since learned that the little place where the silk comes out is called the spinneret. And with her little back legs, placing the silk just so. And I realized in that moment that I was receiving a massive dose of spider medicine. And so when I got home, I read up on spider medicine. And the spider represents a lot of things in a lot of cultures and has for a long time. The spider was revered in the Egyptian culture, in the Greek culture, Hindu culture, the Celtic culture, Chinese, Japanese, Native American, I'm sure many, many others. The spider has been revered as a really potent symbol. And what I took from what I read was that we occupy the center of our own webs. And the spider is a masterful seamstress. She is a weaver of destiny. And the spider doesn't weave anything into her web that isn't entirely deliberate. There's nothing arbitrary or happenstance that happens as the spider weaves her web. It's sort of hardwired into her DNA, like she's not even thinking about it. And if you think about us occupying our own individual webs, often, maybe, perhaps we aren't as skilled as the spider in weaving what is deliberate. Because our webs are individual and unique and intimately intertwined with all of the other webs, kind of making up what we could call the collective conscious web. And often, we're weaving things into our webs that we are entirely unaware of. And I would venture to say that happens a lot. So our webs are definitely intertwined, and there isn't anything that doesn't impact the web. Our thoughts impact our webs. Our feelings impact our webs. Our words impact the web. Certainly our actions and deeds impact the web. I would go so far as to say what we eat and how we take care of ourselves impacts the web as well. And if we are masterful weavers of destiny, if we are these powerful creators that have arisen from this sort of vast eternal ocean, why is it that we don't experience ourselves like that more of the time? And I want to just say that I'm aware I'm in Boulder County, and there might be some places in the country where I give this talk and nobody would actually know the answer to that, but I'm pretty sure most of you do. So, anybody venture a guess? Why we potentially don't experience ourselves more of the time as this dynamic, fluid, present moment that we are that we are continuous with? Well, you all actually know the answer to it. The mind. So we've all got these largely unconscious, habitual mental patterns that a lot of us got very early on in childhood or toddlerhood or infanthood. We've actually come to realize that, I mean, I think a lot of us would have said, yeah, we know this, but we now know, science is backed up, that we bring in fear through our DNA from our ancestors. And there was a study done with some white mice, and what happened was they exposed these mice to the scent of cherry blossoms, and every time they did that, they shocked the mice. So repeatedly, scented cherry blossoms and shock. So the mice had these epigenetic changes where they learned to fear the scent of cherry blossoms, as you would every time you get shocked when you smell them. And subsequent generations of these mice, without ever being shocked, feared the scent of cherry blossoms. So the fear response is measurable. We can measure that by measuring the hormones, the catecholamines in the body. And so what we know now, I mean, a lot of us, I think, would have said, yeah, duh, of course. But what we know now is that our DNA changes such that we bring in fears from the past, from the ancestors. So if you think about a lot of the trauma that's happened on the planet and people fearing each other, it's easy to see how there is stuff coming in from our past, that we show up here as infants and it's already wired into our DNA. So not only do we sort of acquire these habitual mental patterns in this life, but we're coming in with them a little bit too. And these habitual mental patterns, or mental habit patterns, or whatever you want to call them, are like well-worn game trails. And they're so well-worn that entirely unconsciously we are often traveling down them without realizing that we're doing it. And I will use a couple of personal examples. I mean, I'm sure most of you are aware of a lot of this, but I'll use a couple of examples that come from my childhood that I have since been able to shine a light on. And so my parents got divorced when I was like 18 months old. And because of just the situation that I kind of came of age within, I developed this habit of the mind that kind of said that something was wrong with me. And I'm 100% sure that I'm not alone in that, what's wrong with me. And that habit pattern of the mind, so if you think about life stimulus happening and some occasion or events happening, well, my reflex might have been something's wrong with me and whatever behaviors arising from that, right? And I learned to be a people pleaser as a result of that. So I was first a nurse, then a nurse practitioner, and I am a caretaker of people in my life, and that's what my role has been. And it actually, but to my detriment a little bit, it took me till I was about 40 to actually finally not have to do that anymore, right? And another example of these mental habit patterns, just one more crude example. Let's say that I'm standing here and I have this interaction or whatever situation arises with somebody here. And as a result of that, I become sad or I become, angry or whatever it is. The habit pattern of the mind for a lot of people, myself included, tends to be a reaction, and instead of just kind of coming back into our own experience, because we aren't super skilled in our culture and maybe worldwide, I don't know, at actually sitting with uncomfortable sensations, whether it's anxiety or sadness or grief or fear or wherever they are, because it is so uncomfortable for us and we tend to squirm in the face of discomfort. The habit pattern of the mind, usually unconsciously or until it's not, is to bounce off of that fear, but we're not even aware it's happening, and it's this just trigger response down the game trail that is so well worn into reaction towards somebody else. And often what will happen is, all of a sudden we find ourselves creating this negative reality about that other person. And so all of a sudden there's this story. And you know, I think a good thing to do is anytime you're trying to build a case against life, against the person, against the president, a judgment, whatever it is, you know, pause. And the work or the invite or the opportunity is actually, you know, where's the discomfort in the body? So I want to just drive this point home, because after a lot of years of meditation, I can tell you that it is excruciatingly difficult to stay with what is very painful and not bounce off of it into those well-worn game trails. And that is an invitation for all of us. And we have definite concepts, beliefs, ideas that often tend to be a little rigid and fixed. And that keeps us from experiencing this vaster, present moment that we are, well, that we are, actually, that we are, and that we are in continuum with. And sometimes other habit patterns tend to be when things get uncomfortable, people start to plan, and they get really busy, you know, and it's, you know, whatever it is. And then, you know, you guys know the rest of them, right? Facebook, episodes, binge eating, whatever it is. But all these ways of keeping ourselves from actually just experiencing what is here now. And for us to ultimately be able to experience this vaster reality within us, as a wave expressing individually, but being in continuum with the rest of the ocean, we have to know all of it. We don't get to just hooray for the parts that feel good and light and inspired and wonderful, and stuff the parts that often will have us in fetal position, feeling like we're getting eviscerated because it is so painful. So, we could talk about the mind for a long time, but I think we've covered it there. And a few analogies that I like to illustrate this. If we think about ourselves as captains of this great seafaring vessel that is our life, and we stand at the helm, and we stand at our wheel, and we're looking out over a horizon that appears calm and peaceful, and there's blue sky and sunshine, and we think, that is where I'm going. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves in the middle of this storm that we didn't even see coming. What it's good to remember is that there is this mechanical room in the underbelly of the ship. Bless you. And in the mechanical room are all of these various deeply, deeply ingrained mental pathways that are exerting far more effect on our direction than most of us are aware of. What I like to think about it is, if you think about our bodies being the temple for this reality within us, you can think about our ego structures as sort of scaffolding. And scaffolding is sort of rigid and cold. And when there is this scaffolding present within us, to some degree, the dynamic, sort of fluid present reality gets hung up on that. And all of these mental pathways you can think of as lenses through which we perceive reality. So all of us have vastly different experiences in our lives, and so we're all going to have different lenses, but we are organs of perception, and we are perceiving all the time We're perceiving when we're awake, and we are perceiving when we're asleep. We know we're perceiving when we're asleep because we get up to go to the bathroom, so there's some signal, right? Oh, let's wake up and go now. So we're always perceiving, and if you kind of layer these lenses one upon the other, it kind of becomes apparent why our versions of reality can be a little distorted to how things actually are, because we're all perceiving according to our own unique lenses and pathways. And then lastly, for that analogy, isn't that pretty? If you look at the rocks like that, they have a certain appearance, right? They look a certain way. And somebody might come along and describe how they look and say, oh, this is the reality of those rocks. But there's something that we're looking at them through. So if we remove the water, the rocks are not going to appear that way. And as it is with our human experience, if we are, say, hovered in the underbrush, right? If we're hovered in the underbrush, things are going to seem a certain way to us. And we can fight with others about this is how they are. And we can, live our reality based on how things seem to us in the underbrush. But occasionally, by some grace of the divine, we come out of the underbrush. And then maybe we walk up the side of a hill that turns into a mountain. And all of a sudden, the perspective is vastly different. And this perspective that I'm talking about here this evening, the source within, not so much an intellectual perspective, because it's not something that we can read our way into. It's not something that we can talk to others about and all of a sudden have the experience. It's something that we only begin to experience when we turn the lenses inward and start that journey. So, the source within. Lucky for us, we showed up here with all that we need to do this deep dive. And it's one of the most simple things in the world. The most simple, and at the same time, the most difficult things to do. And all it requires is our awareness, our conscious mind, to turn itself inward and begin to be with what our experience is in any moment, whether it's the experience of our breath, the experience of our sensations in the body. And it's sort of like the balm of our being, I would call it. It's what does the healing. It's what we're all seeking. And it's already here, and we already possess it. Well, we don't possess anything, but we have the capacity. And I would venture to say that, of course, it is all the balm we need, because whatever brilliance we arise from, definitely knew we were going to need a little help when we got here. So it gave us tools. And it doesn't require a whole lot. I mean, as we saw with that MRI study that was done out of Harvard, 8 weeks, 27 minutes a day. That's not a lot for significant changes in gray matter of the brain. And our awareness, our consciousness, is kind of like a muscle, in the sense that the more that we use it, the stronger it gets, and the more it serves us. And when we don't use it, it's kind of like sitting on the couch and doing nothing, right? Our muscles are not going to be strong for us. And if we want to go climb a mountain, that's not going to be possible. But if we actually use our awareness, our consciousness, it's kind of like, I think of it as every repetition of coming from the place of thought back to the breath is like one of those repetitions to the gym, you know? And a lot of repetitions, we get really hard, strong muscles. It's just how it goes. And so it doesn't take a whole lot, and we're fortunate to have it. And the more that we spend time here instead of here, the stronger this gets. The less we're looking externally for answers. Our intuition gets a heck of a lot stronger, and all of a sudden we might find ourselves not needing to rely on what is external for us, for our answers, for our knowing, because it's just apparent. It's like a yes or a no, and it's whoom, clear. And there doesn't have to be a whole lot of, thinking and the right side and the wrong side. I'm thinking about the list when you're trying to make a big decision and you have the yeses and the nos or whatever. There just doesn't have to be a whole lot of that kind of thing, because it's just apparent, and it's apparent strongly. And so this intuition becomes like our compass north to serve us. And sometimes, we all know we have it, right? Sometimes we feel a little fear, and we know, oh, gotta get out of here, So it just gives us greater capacity. So I kind of think in visual analogies. So I'm a writer, and I get these images, and then I kind of have to write about them or talk about them. And this kind of came to me one time. And so if you visualize a deep ocean with a really, great bed of kelp, probably the same kind that you guys have snorkeled in, scuba dived in many times. If you think about what's happening at the top, at the surface level, there is turbulence, there are waves, there's wind, there's a lot of movement and sound, and things are just a little more turbulent. But if you go down to the root of the kelp, where things are actually rooted into source, into their source at the bottom of the ocean, things are far more still and quiet. And there's not a whole lot of movement. Things are just utterly still. And it is possible to come from that place, so root into source within us, and be with what's happening at the surface level, but without getting thrashed about and without getting rocked by it. If we just hang out at the surface level and we aren't rooted into source, things seem very tumultuous, they seem scary, they can seem fearful at times, right? Especially these days. If we're hanging out there at the surface. But if we hang out there at the surface and root ourselves in, it's a whole other experience. We can be with our source, which kind of serves as support for us, for our fears, the places that we still tend to contract around. And when we contract around those places, we tend to disidentify from that which we've come from, and we become super identified with the fear place. And we become sort of that thing, right? Instead of I am experiencing anxiety or I'm experiencing whatever, we become that experience and we identify with it, and we are totally sucked into that experience such that we lose contact with that greater thing that's happening. So I really love that analogy, and I wanted to just say a couple of things. I think there is a common misperception that if we accept reality as it is, which ultimately starts with what's happening here, that is somehow an act of sheer complacency. That I've seen the bumper stickers, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention or something like that. And that's actually not true. At the subtle level, if we accept what is happening within the framework of our being, if we accept that and we're able to learn how to, with our conscious awareness, stay with those sensations, we are able to serve a situation in a much more profound way. We're able to come to action from a place that is what the Buddhist tradition would call right action, but a place that is utterly compassionate and loving, and we can be incredibly useful and helpful and decisive, but we're not at the same time like spinning and spewing negativity, which that negativity, if we think about ourselves as those spider webs, that negativity is basically like clouds of dark disharmony that we perpetuate. So it's just worth, I think, thinking about how we encounter things. And if we're really busy building a case and we are perpetuating hardcore negativity about things we don't like, we're kind of defeating our own purpose. And we're far more effective and we can move mountains when we're coming from this other place in a way that we can't when we are perpetuating this hardcore negativity about stuff, especially about ourselves. I mean, it's definitely the first place to look. I think that I know that I'm not alone in having an inner critic who warrants a lot of investigation, right? And I am going to read you guys a couple of poems, okay? They're my poems. I first started writing poems when I was about 11. Before that, I'd written letters and I'd written, had journals, but the poems started coming when I was about 11. And I'm going to read you guys two of my favorite poems. They're more recent poems. They're kind of a little bit long, so bear with me. But I just think they nicely kind of summarize this discussion. Or should I say this diatribe? So, the first one is called Why Bother? I once believed that the only constant is change. Everything changes, always. It is the nature of the unmanifest manifested. I used to believe that the only thing we can count on is death. Like all who have come before and all who will henceforth come, the body will be evacuated. Then one day, I took a dip in another reality. One that, despite the constant transition and movement of life as we know it, doesn't ever change. I couldn't have thought or read my way into this reality. I made contact with it only because I stopped. I hit pause long enough for this other cosmically profound reality to reveal itself. It is still and vast and silent. It is benevolent. It pervades everything, though isn't always experienced. One must develop ears to hear silent music. Eventually, it taught me that I am it, that we arose from it. There is no possibility of being anything else. Separation simply does not exist, despite the fact that the experiential understanding of it is not ubiquitous. Its benevolence is not altered by man's choice to kill, to pollute, to rape and pillage Mother Earth, to cut down her trees and defecate in her oceans. Free will is free will. It is way beyond preference. But since the past, present, and future are all indeed happening now, solutions to man-made problems already exist. It is beyond time and space, beyond concepts of good, bad, right, wrong, self, no self, God, no God. It is not personal. Personal is what we do with it. This totality simply is everything. So why pause for